City Clerk? All right, we don't want to start at 0731. 0730. Vice Mayor, are you online?
I am, Mayor. Thank you.
Great. Okay. With that, we're going to say welcome to the Mesa City Council study session for February 26, 2026. Oh, that's a good one. Vice Mayor Summers is participating by Zoom. Otherwise, all City Council members are present. Today, we're going to hear item 1A, a presentation on the fiscal year 2026-27 general, governmental, and utility fund principles, priorities, and forecasts. Brian and Chris, it's your show.
Good morning, Mayor. Thank you. Mayor and Council, we will be this morning pretty kind of kicking off the fiscal year 26-27 budget process with the City Council with an overview of our financial forecast for the five years. And so with me is Chris Olvey, who is also a Deputy Director with the OMB, and he will be helping out with the presentation. So first I wanted to start off with the homeowners comparison. I know we've seen this before, but just want to kind of reiterate that even with the budget that we have and the forecast that we see, Mesa is still the third most affordable city within the valley that we compare to. And so we have been there for the past several years, and we continue to be right there, right in one of the most affordable cities. And so what I wanted to kind of go through too is just to remind council of what is included in the homeowner comparison. So what we try to do is take what a homeowner in Mesa, what they spend, what their costs are, and if they went to a different municipality, what would that cost be comparable to? So what we include is the property tax, so the primary and secondary property tax. So as mentioned, Mesa does not have a primary property tax, but we do have a secondary property tax. What also is included is the city sales tax, calculated by applying each city sales tax rate to some statistics. And what we look at is kind of what is an average household in the city of Mesa, which is about 2.1, 2.5. And so we take the sales tax and calculate it that way. And then also we take the three major utilities, solid waste, water, and wastewater. And what we do is we combine those to come up with the our homeowner comparison. If you go back to the previous slide, that's where those different different colored bars are. Is so, as mentioned, Mesa does not have a primary property tax, but you see most of the other municipalities do have a primary property tax. Then we've got the secondary property tax, the city sales tax, solid waste, water, and wastewater. So we take all those, combine it, and see how we compare to our neighboring municipalities in the valley and also Tucson to see if you wanted to pick up from Mesa and move to a different municipality, this is how we would compare. So moving on to the financial forecast, just a general overview. We forecast for 5 years, and so what we do is we take the current expenditures and expenses and revenues along with historical trends, but what we also use is a software and data from U of A. It's the forecast project out of U of A, and we take that data, but then also we take a look at the City of Mesa's data, so we drill down into our own data and put it into the software and then go ahead and forecast that. We are conservative. I wanted to kind of highlight that, a conservative multi-year forecasting approach, which allows the evaluation of sustainability of programs and services. So what that does is what we're able to do is when we show you a 5-year forecast, we're also going out a little bit farther. But what that does is we're able to look at the forecast to see, is there any expenses, revenues, things like that that we need to plan for, to where we're not making a judgment in 1 year, the next year, but then the next year after that, then we have to make a different type of judgment. So if we had a revenue loss, and then we have to cut services, but what happens if that next year that revenue comes back or we have an increase? Are we going to add service? So what we try to do is forecast out so we can plan how that forecast will look in the future and be able to sustain our services over the long period. So going into the revenue forecast, as I mentioned, we use some statistical software applied in-house, but then we also collaborate with the departments such as the utilities, development services to see how the permit revenues are coming in, and other departments for their fees and charges also. Some of the relevant indicators is population, account growth, wages, unemployment, building permits, gas prices, and other economic indicators that we put into the software to come up with what our revenue forecast would be. And then we also, as I mentioned, we use specific factors applied for just Mesa itself. On expenditure forecasting, we do the same. However, we also take personal services. As we know, personal services has been a topic in the past couple of years and has been increasing. Also other services and commodities, and I'll go into a little more detail on some of those, of increases in those line items. Utility expenses have gone up. Water commodity purchases have increased, as we've talked about previously. And also chemicals and tipping fees. So, but also the capital, the major projects have increased over the past few years, and we're not seeing prices come down. It's just adding on to the inflation that we have. So we have seen, and even vehicle purchases have increased. The average new car increase has been significant over the past couple of years also. So moving into the general governmental funds, just a reminder, the general governmental funds include the general fund and also the quality of life fund. And the quality of life fund primarily funds the police officers and firefighters. Back in, I believe it was the late 90s, early 2000s, the city passed a quality of life sales tax that was dedicated for 120 police officers and 65 firefighters, and that's what it primarily goes towards. And so with that, what I wanted to show here was council adopted a few years ago the city's financial policies. And what I wanted to do here is, I know we've been presenting for the past couple of years our financial principles, and wanted to kind of correlate our policies to our principles. In the way the city looks at our policies is the policies is what is kind of our floor, our base. What is that what we're looking for? And so with the state, we have to do an adopted balanced budget. An adopted balanced budget is when your expenses match your resources. And when I say resources, that's your revenues along with your fund balance, which is the city's savings account. So if those match, you have a balanced budget, and that is required by state law that we do that. Our policy also mentions that we have an 8 to 10% reserve balance. Going back to our financial principles, the correlation for a balanced budget is a balanced net sources and uses. So with that, a balanced net sources and uses is basically what we're striving for, is to be structurally balanced when your ongoing revenues and your ongoing expenses match together and you don't have to use your savings account. Then with what we strive for on our principles for our fund balance reserve over the 5-year forecast is a 10 to 15% fund balance reserve. And that's throughout the forecast. So what we take a look at is on that 5th year, where do we sit with our fund balance and our fund balance percentage? And so our principles are 10 to 15%. Now, going back to the policies of the forecast period, we do require a multi-year period. And so what that helps is on our principles is the sustainability of programs and services. So once we're able to forecast out those 5 years, we can see, are we able to sustain our services? So for instance, when we build a fire station, we can go ahead and build the fire station, but do we have the revenues to be able to sustain those services for the operations and maintenance of that fire station? And same with a park or any other programs that we set up. Are we able to sustain those services without having to go and cut those after 2 years because the revenues aren't coming in? Then also with fees and charges, that we bring in that helps with the wages and benefits of the staff of the city. And then adopting a 5-year capital improvement program is one of our policies. For the principal is we want to invest in our capital and life cycle replacement projects. So with looking at that, I want to go over some current outlook of our revenue pressures. And as we've known for a little while, the loss of residential rental happened last January. And so on January 25, the city was not able to receive residential rental anymore. So that has an $18 million annual impact, which began last fiscal year, and we're still seeing the effects this fiscal year. Also, the implementation of the state flat tax. So it was around estimated a $6 million annual impact, which began last fiscal year also. So we saw those revenues reduced. The other pressure is the state is seeing a very flat growth in sales tax. Right now, they're at a 0.4% projected annual growth for 25-26 above last fiscal year. So that's pretty flat. And so we're also seeing the same thing as a city. The past 3 fiscal years, our sales tax revenue has been flat. So in fiscal year 23, we came in with about $330 million. Fiscal year 24, we came in $329 million. Fiscal year 25, we came in at $331 million. So even though we're seeing it looks like we're doing really good month over month, our sales tax as a whole for the fiscal year has come in flat for the last 3 fiscal years. So what happens is if we're flat, but our expenditures still increase, we have some pressures there that we need to be able to adjust for. And then also a reduction in our state shared revenues with the incorporation of Santan Valley. So how that works is state shared revenues is our state shared sales tax, also our income tax, and which they call urban revenue sharing, and also our vehicle license tax. So what happens is there's a pie that everyone shares from. Well, when you add someone else in there, the piece of your pie gets reduced. And with that, we went from 91 cities sharing that pie to 92 municipalities now sharing that pie. So we have a reduction in our ongoing revenues of $3 million starting this fiscal year currently that we're in. Also, a reduction is the tax conformity. So the state, on an annual basis, conforms with the federal tax code. And so with the passing of federal HR 1, with the tax reductions and those things, the state is looking at conformity with that. And if they do the whole conform with all of HR 1, we will see an estimated $6 million annual impact starting in 27-28. And so they're still negotiating on what they're going to put into that tax conformity. It could be a little less, but we want to put in there, if they did the whole thing, the $6 million is what we would be looking at a reduction 2 years from now. Because just a reminder that income tax is collected right now for individuals and corporations. However, the state does not distribute that to the towns and cities until 2 years later. So I wanted to kind of show you with some of those pressures, inflation growth. And so what I want to concentrate on is the right-hand side of the chart. And as you see, kind of that big spike was just right after COVID, so in 21. And then it spikes up just in 22, almost in 23, but then it starts coming down. But what happened with that? So as you see in December of 25, which was just this last December, prices have increased almost 25% above prices in 2020 levels. And what we have seen is that a majority of the prices we have done we have seen in purchasing contracts, purchasing commodities, things like that is the prices, just because inflation has lowered, prices have not lowered. Prices have stayed, and then inflation just builds upon those prices. And so that's the expense pressures that we are looking at right now. And so on expense,
Brian.
yes.
Brian.
I have a quick question. So
Yes.
explain to me, so inflation is up 24%. So why is our sales tax flat, right? Because presumably we'd be collecting more tax on higher prices. So can you explain that to me?
So yes, Mayor, council member, go forth. I can guess on how that works. The way it looks is that there could be, with the prices increasing, people are now really looking at what are they buying, and maybe they're being a little more frugal. Maybe they're doing the cheaper brands, but still buying the same. And so with those prices increasing, they're not buying as much, so we are flat. So if you increase the price but buy less, we're still going to get that same revenue. So that could be happening. I don't know. We would have to see. We don't have the detail of what everybody is buying, but I can kind of guess of that. With the prices increasing, people are not buying as much. So with that, it's still staying stable across the board.
Mr. Adams.
So I just want to make sure I understand, Mr. Ritchell. So we're not seeing that just specifically to Mesa, that's statewide, is that right? The decline in sales tax revenue, it's pretty much a statewide thing, you're thinking?
Mayor, Councilmember Adams, that is correct. So as mentioned, we are seeing a flat growth with the state also of sales tax and our revenues that we're getting from there. We're seeing flat growth also.
So this isn't the case that people are going somewhere else to buy whatever it is, it's just across the board?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you.
And remember, Mayor and Council, we're talking about all sales tax. I mean, as Brian said, retail has been pretty resilient overall, and you see that. People are still shopping. People are going out to restaurants. People are doing that. It's just with different tax changes that have happened at the state, and then also the elimination of taxing sources like the residential rental. When he says we've lost that, we would not be flat had not some of those changes been made at the state level. So I know when we say sales tax, we all immediately just jump to retail, but we're talking about all sources there. So that's why we've have this dichotomy of people are still spending, people are still out shopping and spending in our community, and that's we see that in the retail category. But it's when you make other tax changes that impact other sales tax collection, that's where we're seeing it flatten out both for the state and for municipalities.
That's what I
Thanks
was
for
kind of.
Yeah, because I'm wondering, is somebody beating the socks off us in retail sales? But
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
But yeah, as Mayor and Council, to the city manager's point, we are seeing good growth in retail. We're seeing it in utilities. We're seeing it in other categories, which is helping to keep us flat. If it wasn't
You'd be.
for that, if it wasn't, we would be dropping because of the loss of residential rental. But if we had residential rental on top of that, yes, we'd be growing at a significant amount right now.
Ms. Taylor.
Can I just add for public observance, one, for people who are thinking when we say inflation is really high, I just want to note this is cumulative inflation. Just reading my notes here, that this is not annual inflation. So CPI might be about 2.4%, but those past cumulative prices didn't go away. So things like, insurance costs, medical expenses, infrastructure costs, just so everyone understands, that's where we're talking about it. And also, I'd like to also publicly comment that we did not get the removal of the tax exemption on our data centers, and Mesa doesn't have a food tax. So those are other sources where we are not generating revenue, so.
Do you want to hear some more to that? And there's bills pending in the legislature that may still even hamper sales tax revenue collection for municipalities. That can hurt us even more.
Yeah, Mayor, and you're
It is-
going to see a common theme as we dive into the numbers a little bit more, that if not for changes that were outside of our control, we wouldn't be talking about the situation that we've found ourselves in the last couple of years. This was not overspending on the city's part. This was not bad financial forecasting on the city's part. This was the culmination, as Brian alluded to, of all these different things happening at the same time. And I know in my years here, I mean, we see tax changes, we see a new city incorporate, but all of that usually doesn't all happen at the same time, along with the highest inflation in in probably our lifetimes that we're going to see. And so it really has been the perfect storm the last few years. But there's some silver lining, and we're getting to that. I know it seems like, you know, it's all dark and stormy right now as we're talking about that, but because of that conservative fiscal management that Brian alluded to, we're going to get to some better news here in just a few slides.
Well, I just going to share, going back to that slide on inflation. I've read a lot of cardiology strips in my career, and so is the vice mayor, and this looks like V-fib, and we're almost going to flatline right here. And then we need to put a defibrillator on it to help pump it up. So
Yes,
you
Mayor,
know,
we still have some bumps in there, so we're still
this is
alive.
a poor
So,
V-fib
yes.
strip here on the on a 12 lead.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it gave me flashbacks there. What am I looking at? So, all right, continue on. Sorry.
No, thank you, Mayor, Council.
break it
Current
up a
outlook
little.
for expenditure pressures, this is some of the categories I was mentioning, contracts and services, for instance, landscaping, custodial maintenance. We have definitely seen an increase in our fleet maintenance and repair for third-party labor costs, parts, and fuel. Also, market-driven compensation and competitive benefits, those have increased over the past few years. Software and licensing, we're definitely seeing an increase, and some of that is contributed to a lot of the software companies are having us go to the cloud now, which is a little more expensive, and on an annual basis, it becomes more expensive because now we do an annual subscription instead of waiting 5-10 years to upgrade. Now it's on a continual basis. And then also, we have the continuing ARPA initiative. So some of the initiatives that the city has set up during with the ARPA funding, now we have it with the ongoing general fund support, such as the Real-Time Crime Center, city Wi-Fi, the homeless support, and some of the behavioral health programs. So putting some numbers to those categories, as I mentioned, for the general governmental fund, fleet and repair. So 90% of the costs are PD and fire, which they have some of the bigger of the fleets. We've seen a 51% increase over the past 4 years. The software licensing, as I mentioned, we've seen over 135% for PD and fire. Landscaping services, 55%, and then also custodial is 64%. And then when I mentioned about the citywide impacts also is medical and dental. We've seen significant increases in the medical and dental. It's up almost 40% over the past 4 years, and we see a significant increase coming up this year and the following years.
Brian, question?
I just want to make sure I understand. So 90% of the fleet cost is PD and fire?
That is correct. For the general governmental fund, that is correct, yes.
And especially the complexity of those vehicles as well. You're not talking about just, you know, a light-duty truck of fixing a Ford F-150, not that there's not complexity in that, but when you start talking about the types of vehicles that are maintained for police and fire, that adds to the complexity and the cost that's associated with servicing that fleet.
Yeah, Mayor and Council, those are, as we know, those vehicles are run almost 24/7 because they share the vehicles on different shifts and things like that. So they do cost a little bit more to maintain. So to put a graph to our total sources and uses for the general governmental fund for our current forecast, as you see in 24-25, we have the actuals. Our revenues came in slightly above our expenditures. We are forecasting some increase in our expenditures and some dips in our in the revenues. However, we'll see that for the next few years, but we do look to become structurally balanced where our revenues and our expenses come in at in 29-30 as structurally balanced. So that's where we're looking to grow out, where our revenues will surpass our expenditures. And as you see, the blue line with our reserve balance percentage, it starts dipping, but then it starts, we're consistently about 20-21% out in the future. And so just to remind council that our principal is 10 to 15, but right now we're looking at about 20%. And so if we go to the next slide, what I wanted to show here was this is the forecast that we had when we adopted the budget for 25-26 last June. And so what I want to highlight here is our net sources and uses, how we were negative all the way throughout the forecast. And we tried to, I know we tried with the reductions, but then also we saw significant increases in personnel costs. We were looking to try to get structurally balanced. However, with some of those pressures, we weren't able to in it. So the structurally balanced goes outside of our forecast. And you see the ending balance starts dipping into our reserves, and by the end of the forecast, we're at 9.2%. Yes, we're within our in our policy, but we would like to be in between 10 and 15 for our principals. So what we did now is with the departments looking at it, and also we revised some of our revenue estimates and looking at another 2% reduction for right now. We're looking much better to where now our net sources and uses are structurally balanced within, as is shown on the graph, 2930, and then starting to grow out of that. And as you see, our reserve balance, we drop to about 21%, but then start growing out of it. So right now, we have moved up our structurally balanced from outside of our forecast to inside our forecast. And so a couple of things I want to mention here, though, too, is that this is what the forecast we have right now. We are still going through our budget process, and so there will be some adjustments to this forecast depending on programs and reductions and things like that. So that $2.3 million in 2930 could fluctuate up or down depending on how the budget process goes. There's still some decisions that need to be made by city management and council on that budget process. So, but this does include the full 2% reduction. So we wanted to put that in there to see, okay, if we took all of the 2% of all of the departments, which is roughly just over $10 million, what would our forecast look like, knowing that we will still be making adjustments pending city manager approval.
So Mayor and Council, again, big deal though. We were able to, thanks to the work of council and staff, 2 full fiscal years now, we've moved up that structural rebalancing that council had asked for last year. What we heard you loud and clear that we wanted to see more aggressive approach to get back to that, to being structurally balanced sooner than what was in our forecast. And so to do that 2 fiscal years sooner is a big deal, considering all those pressures that we just talked about, because some of those were compounded, you know, since the time that we adopted the budget. We talk about tax conformity with the federal HR 1. That was not last year, and that's $6 million that we have in. So even in spite of even new challenges laid on top of us since council adopted the budget last year, we've been able to make such a dramatic improvement on this. So, you know, we're not out of the woods yet. We have a lot of challenges, but the trajectory is really strong. And that's the point that I really want to stress this morning, because we heard your challenge to accelerate that, and OMB and just the ability to manage, show that fiscal restraint from the departments, the 2% cuts that folks have done, which is never a fun exercise, but it's really helped us to be able to tighten our belts and to find efficiencies and to work through this. So that's a pretty dramatic swing. And as Brian said, that number, you know, 2.3 million in the positive, that could fluctuate a little bit, but the bottom line is it's basically flat at that point. You know, whether it's a million below or a couple of million above, I mean, we're basically back to flat, and then we continue that positive trend, as you see, moving forward, where that only grows. Most importantly, too, I think it shows that change in the percentage. I know Brian's highlighted, but when you see our fund balance not drop below 21%, remember the council policy is 8 to 10. Our goal is 10 to 15, and we don't drop below 21% during this time, and so under the new forecast. So that's really positive too, because we've been able to stabilize our savings, and then we maintain very robust savings. I mean, again, we've had this because we were conservative and we didn't spend some of those one-time revenues when post-COVID, when sales tax and other things just kind of went through the roof in spending, consumer spending, we socked that away into our rainy day fund. It started raining, we're using it, but we're still, at the end of the day, maintaining some of the highest reserve balances in the city's history by the time we work our way through this. So that's a real testament to the work that our staff has done to ensure that we are still extremely financially sound at the end of this.
All right, thank you, Ms. Duff, and then Ms. Goforth and Mr. Heredia.
I know it's early and we don't know what legislation is going to do, the state legislation. Are we running any scenarios if we're not able to take any increases in our sources?
Mayor, council member, we did build in total conformity. Correct me if I'm wrong, Brian. So, the governor and the legislature right now are debating which portions of tax conformity with HR 1 that are going to be implemented in the state. We took the worst case scenario and cooked that into what you're seeing today. So even if we went with total tax conformity, which is what the governor has vetoed now twice, we have that baked in. And so if they do less, well, that helps that improves our situation. We'll get to probably one of the bigger challenges we'll have from some legislative intent would be on the utility side of the equation and not on the general governmental side. And we'll get to that in just a few minutes and can speak to that, Councilmember Duff.
Yeah, and so we're not really looking at the pending legislation until it passes.
We are. I certainly don't want to leave you with that impression. Miranda and Kathy have been keeping us informed as anything comes down the pike that could influence our revenue. Primarily, the biggest concern has been some of the bills that have been alluded to that deal with our ability to manage our utility and how fees and charges are assessed on the utility side. So that we'll discuss that on the utility fund side. But on the general governmental side, really the biggest unknown by and large, and there's other bills out there. I don't want to tell you that there's something that won't have an impact on us, but really the biggest financial uncertainty rests with the tax conformity, and so we want to take the worst case scenario and bake that in and go from there. And if it improves our standing, well, that's great. That only helps us.
Okay, second question is on the previous slide on the general governmental funds, on the total uses on year 26-27, there's a dip and then it goes back up in 27-28. Is that for the cuts that we're projecting for this year on the 26-27?
So, yes.
We're going from 737 to 718 and then up to 742 on the total uses.
Yeah, I'm looking. I've got that here, 26-27. So yes, Mayor, Councilmember Duff, what that also is what we have is the carryover, and the biggest portion of that is carrying over the expenses we don't have. So what is projected in 25-26, we have about $26 million in carryover, and what is going to happen with that, that's going to move over to the following year. And so right now it looks low, but when we carry that over, it'll become a little higher. So that's where some of the budgeting is, to where we have contracts or purchases that we have budgeted for, but we haven't paid for yet. And so what happens is that we just carry that capacity over until we then go ahead and pay for those.
That was one of the, and Mayor, that went to Councilmember Goforth's question when we were in the strategic planning session last week. That's one of the hardest concepts to kind of illustrate here in the budget, because we have a lot of one-time already budgeted and accounted for funds that naturally roll over because of, like I said, maybe the expenditure doesn't happen a delay in construction. You think of, like we ran into some delays on a fire station, and you have to carry money over, even though you had planned maybe to start construction on a certain year. So you have these various expenditures that we have to carry over as one-time expenses, which is sometimes hard to it skews the numbers, and even though those are one-time carryovers. And we've been talking about, Brian and his team are going to look at some different ways that we can illustrate that, moving forward, because I think it would be helpful both for the council and for the public to understand that dynamic that goes into the budget, because that accounts for some of those different numbers, structural numbers that you were asking about, Councilmember Goforth, last week. So we're going to look and see how we can illustrate that. It gets really complicated
I
and
bet.
dense,
Yeah,
but
for sure.
we're trying to find a way to simplify that and be able to tell that story.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful to the public to be able to pull that out and talk about it.
Yeah.
And explain it,
Yeah,
how it
so-
works. But as you
yeah.
say, it's getting into accounting weeds, and that's difficult.
So, yeah, Mayor and Council, one of the other things too is that in the projected 25-26 is the PD radios, which is $9.5 million. So we have that expense as part of the $737 million, but then we don't have that expense in the following year, so that's why it dips down there too.
Those
So
things
it's like
are
one of those
helpful
one-time,
as well.
those one-time expenses that may hit, but then we don't have it the following year, so that's why it looks like it drops significantly.
Yeah.
And that's part of telling that story, Mayor and Council, is, and we've done it in the past in certain ways, and it got complicated, but still pulling out those large one-time expenses that we've already accounted for, that we knew were coming. They were life cycle replacements, like in the case of these radios. But, when you have a few $1 million, dedicated to one particular project, and we have several of those, obviously in a budget of our size and scale. So pulling some of those out and highlighting those would be important too as we move forward.
And I think there's this, I think based on our polling, there's a lot of trust of our residents in what we do, and they don't have to see, maybe all of those explanations, but there's a group of people that it's just not there, and that they would like to see that. And I think that trust is built on years and years of financial stability and watching the city maintain a strong financial position, But there are some new residents that, don't have that history and maybe need a little bit more explanation as to why some of these things happen, which I think is absolutely fair and reasonable. I know, so our sources are flat for a couple years, and then they start to rise again. Can you explain?
So that's what we were looking, the reason for that is what I mentioned previously with our sales tax being flat for the past few years.
Yeah.
We're seeing, forecasting that we'll still be flat and want to see how that growth goes. And then we'll see, hopefully, we start seeing our normal 3 to 5% increase growing out of that once we see prices stabilize, depending on how the tariffs are and how things go like that, to where we'll start growing out of that on the sales tax side and the income tax side.
Interesting.
So it's assumed that price is stabilized.
Yes, once the prices stabilize, then we'll start hopefully seeing that growth and seeing the impact of any of those prices. But as I mentioned, I could show you if you want to go to that.
But I mean, take out, all the categories. I mean, as you said, retail spending
Right.
has continued to increase, right? If you pulled spending out, or
It has.
the
I think if you
traditional-
went back, Mayor and Council, and you looked at a 60-year, growth curve on this, you would see that constant inflationary growth. As things get more expensive, naturally get more expensive, then it costs more, and so the sales tax generated by that is more. We have new residents move into the city. We have new shopping come online. All of those things lead to that normal inflationary growth. What happened was, with all of these changes happening at the same time, it was a shock to the system. The mayor used a great medical imagery on that to show it, but that's really what it was. And so now the patient is stabilizing, and then the patient's going to get better. And that's what Brian and Chris and the team look at is, after this kind of shock to the system, we've stabilized, and then it'll be normal inflationary growth in revenue that we historically see.
So for instance, Mayor and Councilmember Goforth, for fiscal year 27, 28, as I mentioned, that's where the $6 million of conformity, where we would lose $6 million. So if we had the $6 million in there, we would be at 721 million. So we would have a nice growth going from 700 to 721 to 745. But with that tax conformity, we have that in there to where that's where our reduced. So it does look like we're kind of flat for our total sources. And then we start growing out of it.
We just need more stints. So with that, did you ask all your questions?
No, I have one more. So can you reiterate, Scott, the reasons that that the current forecast is looking more favorable than the adopted budget? You say maybe we that 2% cut, right? We are maybe a little bit more sources than we anticipated, things like that. We haven't necessarily changed our conservative forecasting philosophy.
Not at all.
Okay.
Nothing has changed in that regard. In fact, that's our savior at the end of the day because we fully load all costs, right? We budget as if every position is filled 365 days a year at the highest, level, and then we back down from that as we have vacancies and personnel savings. We have revenue that has come in higher on the retail side because it has stayed robust. So so we've accumulated more than we projected in retail sales. And so when you factor in all those different things that we do of expecting the worst in revenue and then expecting the most in spending, and we are conservative on our spending, and we've had more robust revenue than beyond our very conservative estimates, then that has accounted for the growth that you see. That's reflected in the new in the new forecast.
So I assume we're going to be having discussions about the 2% and what is the result.
Right.
What maybe services or programs
Yeah.
Yes.
have to be cut.
Yep.
Okay.
So Mayor and Council, when we get to the end, I'll show you the calendar and the kind of the schedule. And when I come back with the city manager's proposed budget and the departments then have theirs, that's when our discussions will begin to start with, okay, what programs and which things do we want to continue or not continue and stuff like that.
So in the last year or so, it's been, this is a different discussion, but just laying the groundwork, it's been, here's a 2% cut, but but we're actually going to increase our budget by,
Right.
certain amount. So hopefully we'll get a little bit more clearer on when we say 2% cut, that doesn't mean your budget actually goes up.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. And
Thank
I think what you're also seeing, I mean, we embed in personnel cost and because we've got to stay competitive, right? So when we look at these forecasts, we're not taking that 2% cut then on the backs of our employees on their wages and other things like that, because as we've seen on the public safety side in particular, that's where we've definitely had to stay competitive. What we needed to do, though, what the 2% really represented was this ability to tighten our belt and slow the growth to allow that natural development of inflationary income to catch up with what we lost. And so it just put the brakes on, didn't stop the car, but it put the brakes on some of those increases that we were seeing in our expenditures. And so that was enough, as you see through the trend line, that was enough then to allow that natural growth to catch up with what our expenses were.
I want to say, sorry.
Because, Brian, and let me just say, because again, we would not have exceeded that if that revenue had not been taken away from the legislature. So that goes back to the point of we weren't overspending. If we had that revenue back into our sources, we would have never become out of whack. So by doing that avoided us having to do draconian cuts when we knew that we would be able to grow out of this without damaging our reserve fund at the same time. So that it just was that pressure valve that allowed us to get through these next few years and then go back into the black where we will maintain that balance between our uses and our sources on that.
So maybe we've delayed some projects and, is that what you're saying? We are.
Yeah, we have, and we've cut things, we've looked at different efficiencies that the departments have, all those things that council has challenged us to do, and Councilmember Adams made a good point, I think during the strategic planning session as well, where we were talking about, well, these 2%, you know, council has different priorities and different emphasis, you know, throughout the city. But what we've seen, and you'll see this as we get into the different budgets and what we've seen, there's belt tightening that can happen in every department and efficiencies that can happen in every department. So even though we know some of those bedrock areas that are always going to be an emphasis for the city, there are things we can do better and more efficiently in those areas as well. And those areas have responded. Now, moving forward, because I think we're on a good trajectory, assuming, you know, all of this continues, you wouldn't see necessarily across the board like that. We would have to be more strategic, to your point, Councilmember Adams, where we would start making some of those, you know, more challenging choices about, you know, where should certain programs be eliminated or whatnot. But right now, what we're seeing is that we were able to grow out of this and this trajectory without having to make those draconian cuts, just by tightening our belts and looking for efficiencies. I mean, we all do that, right? You think of personal expenses that you have that are maybe, you know, you could cut out that, you know, subscription to the 37 streaming services we all, you know, you look at those things and what can you live without, right? And those are some of the discussions that our departments have had of, you know, what were the nice to haves on some of our softwares and programs and other things that we've been able to look at and say, you know, we're not really getting the bang for the buck for that, so we should eliminate that. And I think that's healthy. I mean, I think that's really healthy, just like it is for any family to look at that. It's healthy for us as an organization to look at that, and that's where some of these across the board belt tightening's been very helpful.
Absolutely,
just
and I
calling that into
think
question.
our residents appreciate
Yeah.
that because that's exactly what they're doing. So thank you.
Yeah,
That's great
it's
stuff.
just as, I mean, that's a really good point, and we get it. Our residents are dealing with those inflationary pressures, and they go to the grocery store and everything's more expensive, and so they're belt tightening, and so we should be too, and they deserve that, you know, from us to act as they have to act, as we all have to act in our, you know, non-city roles of making sure that we're being good stewards of the resources here.
We call that spring cleaning.
Mr. Heredia.
Brian, is this, looking at the current forecast, the ending reserve, is this I think this is the largest ending reserve percent that I've seen in my council years.
Mayor, Councilmember Heredia, I believe it is. Just the way the forecast has come and with the fiscal responsibility and the fiscal stewardship of the departments and being able to do those 2% for the last 2 fiscal years and then this fiscal year coming up. And with the revenue that we're seeing, hopefully going to grow out of it. And I believe it is one of the highest, if not the highest, in the 5th year that we have presented.
Yes. And then I think that leads to the, you know, why we do this every year, right? As we move on to the budget discussions, we got to understand that, you know, yes, we drop, but I've never seen it drop below 20% since I've been on council. So just to remind folks, colleagues and folks out there, is that I think our staff does a great job in measuring these pieces and forecasting that. And so it's something that we need to also maintain aware that we've had these things as far as the success as far as forecasting this work. On the sales tax piece, are we still one of the lowest collection of sales tax in the region and including Tucson? You know, when you look at the home comparison piece, right? I think, you know, that dark green graph, dark green bar, seems like we're still kind of, as far as collection, as far as the homeowner's annual cost comparison, we're still we're still one of the lowest, I think, or we've made some progress. You know, I think when I first came on council, we were the lowest, I think, of collection, and we just didn't have kind of the assets. I think we've done a great job, and I think it's imperative to keep on doubling down on trying to create more sales tax revenue opportunities, right? And so with some of the large projects that we're talking about in the upcoming months, I think having that as a thing to having in our heads as far as, all right, what do we need to keep on collecting more sales tax revenue, right? And so to the joke that Mr. Butler mentioned at the Cubs game, you know, he saw all those people and his sales tax revenue, right? I think that frame, I think we need to maintain that, being so reliant on sales tax is going to be an important aspect to how do we create more opportunities, especially the size that Mesa is, right? We shouldn't be the lowest or the top 3 lowest in this graph, right? We should be one of the top, right? Where, I see Glendale with that sales tax, right? Like it's humongous, right? So of course they have a couple things that spur up a lot of sales tax, but we should have that mentality as well as we move forward with these years. But
Mayor and Councilmember Heredia, when we look at, sales tax revenue per capita, Mesa is the second lowest compared to the Valley cities. We also have a 2% sales tax rate. Different cities have different rates. Glendale's at a 2.9% sales tax rate, whereas ours is 2%. So, we also don't have a sales tax on groceries, so that also impacts our standing comparing to other cities.
And so Mayor, Councilmember Heredia, also to your point about how heavily reliant the city of Mesa is on sales tax, to that point is when we were in COVID and people were shopping local, we saw a significant jump of our sales tax because people are shopping local. Now that things have opened up, most people have gone back to their normal routines of we export a lot of our sales tax to Scottsdale, Chandler, Gilbert, things like that, to where if we can keep it in-house and shop Mesa, that would definitely help out with the sales tax growth of the city of Mesa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think Scottsdale's doing a better job because it's people that don't live in Scottsdale that are paying the sales tax. I mean, if you live in Glendale, you're paying it. Mm-hmm. So we want to be towards the lower where we create, like you said, we create those opportunities for people outside of Mesa to come in and spend money. And that's what we're working on. We're working on that economic development.
Yeah, and to Mayor and Council and to Chris Olby's point is that the city of Mesa does not have a food tax, and almost everybody else has a food tax, so they're collecting tax on the food also. So that so when someone goes and purchases food, but then they also purchase something else there, we're getting a little bit of the sales tax to where if you go and purchase food at somewhere else, they're getting all of that sales tax there.
Not if the legislature has their way.
But that's the intentionality that this council has told us on the retail side, that they want to see us do everything that we can to capture that instead of just, and that's why we're, as Councilmember Heredia alluded to, I mean, that's why we have some great exciting projects that are in the works that are game changers on the type and quality of retail. But also the council has maximized the opportunities along State Route 24. We have new car dealerships coming in that are major sales tax drivers. We have some big box retailers that are looking at locating in parts of our city, which are big sales tax drivers. And so taken together, I think the fact that we are looking at retail and the quality of retail definitely helps. And Brian and Chris really hit it though. I mean, when you compare what we tax versus some other cities and then the rate that we tax, that also comes into play, though, as why we look at that lump sum number and say, well, we're lagging, a Glendale, but we're almost a full cent cheaper than Glendale, and they have a food tax on top of that as well. So those are some of the factors as well. But we all know we want the city to step up its game on the quality of retail, which drives larger numbers. Like you said, in Scottsdale, it's luxury retailers, right? When you go and you purchase from some of those shopping establishments, those are higher end products in a lot of cases, and so that drives obviously a higher sales tax return on that sale. So those are all the things that we've got to work on and are working on.
Mayor, can I ask one question about I really need to understand something. So for the net sources and uses, I was curious to know, actually, I guess it would be total sources. Do we include, we were talking about the one-time, your carryovers, those one-time expenses. Do we include the funds that we receive as a city of different grants in those sources that we've received? We're receiving money, I know, from an outside source, but we're still spending it. So I know that in the ledgers, it's going to show money came in, we spent that money. So how does that affect these numbers?
Yeah, no, Mayor, Councilmember Taylor, that those grants do not affect these numbers because those are recorded in a separate fund. It's a restricted fund, so we're able to track, we're required by general accepted accounting principles and government accounting to track those in a separate fund as a restricted fund, because that's all they can be spent on is whatever that grant is allowed. So we do not put it in the general governmental fund. So those are not included in this.
Okay.
So they're in the overall budget adoption, just not in the general
In
governmental
this specific.
fund. Correct,
Okay,
yes.
thank you. I was just trying to clarify that. And I just also want to say, remember, Glendale has 2 stadiums. They turned into Swift City, and they just built a giant hotel with a roller coaster behind it. So, I mean, give yourself some grace.
Mayor, just a quick comment. Just a couple things. It would be helpful for me if, and you may have presented this earlier, so I apologize, or somewhere else, but if you have information on the various cities we've shown here in the graph, what those tax rates are, I'd appreciate that. And it's not anything I need now, but the comment I have is to Mr. Butler's comments earlier about supporting retail that generates sales tax. I'll give you an example. When I see someone come along who wants to use, for example, an abandoned corner location big box, and they say, you know, I'd like to sell high-end trucks there. I think in cases like that, we need to work pretty hard to find a way to say yes, as opposed to find ways to tell him that, no, you can't display them there or whatever. And I'm just using a hypothetical. But this is where I think department to department to department, we can work hand in hand to achieve these objectives and try to facilitate, especially the higher end stuff. When, you know, if you sell 20 or 30 of these things at 50 grand a pop every month, we're smiling. So just a comment, I think it goes to an overall attitude of everyone involved in reuse and whatnot. Let's understand how it affects the city, not just in terms of reuse of a building, but in terms of generation of transaction privilege tax. So thanks for those comments. I appreciate it.
So Mayor, Councilmember Adams, to answer your first question, a list of the sales tax is part of the homeowners comparison. It's the very last page. There's a table that shows all of the rates of each individual city for water, wastewater. It shows the tax rates, but we can definitely send that particular slide out to the council. But it is on, if you go on our website and go over to the homeowners comparison and scroll down, we do have that table there that will show all of the tax rates for the cities.
Okay, I can do that, or if you want to send it out, that'd be great. Thank you. Thank you.
Carry on.
So with that, I think we've been through, we've talked about these slides. We'll move on to the utility fund.
All right. So similar to what Brian presented on the general governmental slide, this is just a side-by-side comparison of some of the financial policies and the financial principles. So just to highlight a couple of these, the financial policies, we have maintained a reserve balance of 8 to 10%, similar to the general governmental. Our financial principles, we strive for a 20% or higher reserve fund balance for the utility fund. And then our financial policies do call for an examination of utility rates annually, and that pairs with the smooth rate adjustment process that we've incorporated, as well as looking at the equity between the residential and the non-residential rates, that we had that discussion, particularly with water in the last rate cycle. So utility operations, overall, we view the utility fund and it's reviewed as a whole. So each utility is operated as a separate business center. However, there will be financial fluctuations every year. So a good example of that is due to weather conditions. So if there is less rainfall, we'll typically see higher water consumption and higher revenues in the water utility. Conversely, if we have a warm winter, like this year, we'll see less natural gas usage, and that'll reduce revenues into that utility. So that's why we review it as a whole, because each utility is going to fluctuate on a year-to-year basis. Again, this reserve balance can be used to smooth rate adjustments year to year, and that balance can be used to phase in new programs or any changes to operations. So similar to general governmental, the utility fund has experienced inflationary pressures. So 5 of the 6 here over the 4-year period from fiscal 2021 to 24-25 increased more than 50%. The first one, fleet maintenance and repair, the vast majority of that is going to be our solid waste fleet, which is picking up the bins and barrels every day. Solid waste disposal is going to include landfill and recycling costs. The water commodity, those have increased 56% over this 4-year period, and 24-25 is last fiscal year. So as we're looking at additional cuts on the Colorado River, that's going to put more expense pressure on that line item. We've seen chemical costs increase 57% across water treatment plants and wastewater reclamation plants. And then the Val Vista Water Treatment Plant and 91st Avenue Water Reclamation Plant, both of those have increased more than 60% over that 4-year period. So just looking at a graph of the operating costs of the utilities and how much they have increased since 2021. The dashed line represents fiscal 25-26, which is the current fiscal year. So these are the quarter 2 year-end estimates. We require departments to submit quarterly revised revenue and expenditure estimates. So we're still in the middle of fiscal 25-26, and that'll fluctuate depending on how the rest of the year goes. The one that sticks out here is the wastewater utility. As discussed during last budget cycle last year, there was a significant increase in the 91st Avenue Water Reclamation Plant budget. That's the biggest wastewater plant in the state that Mesa participates in, and it's an aging plant that requires more maintenance and upkeep costs. Then just looking at some of the priority utility capital projects. So the Central Mesa Reuse Pipeline will be fully completed this year, wrapping that up. The Signal Butte Water Treatment Plant expansion is currently under construction and will be through 2027. The smart metering implementation will be completed by the end of the calendar year. There are various natural gas capacity expansion projects going on. And then the Broadway Road improvement with transportation. So this is a streets project, but there is coordination with the utilities to review if there needs to be upgrades or updates to the utilities when we have streets projects. This project in particular involves the electric, gas, and water utilities, so they'll all be participating in that project. So similar to general governmental, this is a graph of the updated forecast. The dashed lines represent the projection and forecast. The uses for the first 3 years from 25-26 to 27-28 are above the revenues, which results in a drawdown of that fund balance, the blue line slightly dropping. And then in 28-29, the revenues are above the expenses, which brings back the utility fund balance to slightly above 20% in the final year of the forecast. So just a reference point where we started with the adopted budget. So if you look at the middle part of the table, the total net source and uses, we had a negative net source and uses until the very last year, 29-30. We also had a very low reserve balance percentage in 27-28 and 28-29 of 4.9 and 4.6%. That did grow back up to 7% as we had the positive net source and uses in 29-30. So what this forecast has, just as a reminder, this was before we considered the capacity fee. So all growth projects needed to be funded through the utility fund. That's about $400 million worth of projects. And just looking at the forecast and what it was, the water department between water and wastewater deferred and pushed out $180 million worth of plant and system infrastructure projects out of this forecast window to try to accommodate for some of those priority projects. So as we roll forward to the current forecast, this does include the impact of the capacity fee. So the $400 million worth of growth projects is now being covered by the capacity fee, and it's not included in the base utility rates. And because of that, we're able to move those deferred projects back into the forecast, and those are going to be plant repairs, pipe projects, that kind of thing.
Well sites?
What's that?
Putting well sites in there?
Yeah, yep, wells are in. So,
Are those bonded projects or, okay.
so if the well, Mayor, Councilmember Duff, if it's a new well for growth, then it would be a capacity fee project. But if it is a rehab of a current well, then it would be as a part of the utility fund forecast. And it would be a pledge revenue obligation.
Well, being under 20% on a reserve hurt our bond rating?
So we do have that 20% for the credit rating agencies to take a look at. In the 24-25, you see we have the 21.4%. This forecast is better than what we had last year, but that reserve balance percentage is something that they look at.
Yeah, Mayor, Councilmember Duff, they look at the forecast as a whole also. So what they want to see is that the utility is financially sustainable, and so when they're looking at that, they also look at the net sources and uses along with the reserve, and with them seeing with the net sources and uses now going positive in fiscal year 28-29 compared to what we showed them last year, and with the reserve balance growing out, that will definitely, they'll consider that when they're doing our bond rating.
Ms. Goforth?
So did you say, I think I missed all that, the adopted budget forecast was prior to the capacity fee adoption. So with the current forecast you've pulled out, you said, did you pull out that 400 million of projects for growth?
Mayor,
Okay.
yeah, Mayor, Councilmember Goforth, that $400 million is now being covered by the capacity fee and isn't included in the utility fund, which is the base utility rates.
So, and Mayor, Councilmember Goforth, and to kind of go into a little more detail, is that the debt service payments are not in there. So we wouldn't have 400 million expenditures in our forecast. What we do is we take, okay, it's the 400 million. If we have to issue debt, whenever we issue debt, then we put that debt service into the forecast, and that's what is part of the forecast.
And so I would assume in your sources, the debt's in there as well?
The debt would be out. Yes, if we
So-
did issue debt, it would be in our, no,
It is in
it
the
was
source?
not. The debt issuance is not part of our sources because that's tracked in a separate fund.
But
'Cause
the
it
debt
pays-
service payment
But the
is?
debt service
Okay.
payment for that, because what the debt service payment is from the revenues. So when the revenues come in, we pay the debt service. But when we do a construction of a plant or a well, that gets recorded in a capital project fund, so it's a separate fund, so we can track those expenditures separately. And when we issue a bond for that project, those revenues go in to offset those expenses, but then the debt service goes into the operating fund.
And that's the same with the general fund?
That is the same with the
debt
general
isn't
fund,
included
yes.
as sources? Okay.
Yep.
Mr. Adams?
I'm pleased to see these numbers, and in my experience, I'm glad the question about our bond rating was asked, because in my experience as a credit management professional over the years, if I were looking at these numbers comparatively, I would see a significant increase and improvement in what we're doing here and some of the changes made. So I can only speak for myself on my experience, but if I were making an underwriting decision here or evaluating credit for whatever purpose, I would see significant improvement. So I think that'd be my comment to this.
And
Thank you.
Mayor, Councilmember Adams, to that point, the big driver of this, which helped significantly, is council adopting that capacity fee and being able to use that capacity fee for growth, paying for growth.
Yeah, Mayor, Council, that is the key, right? Because the big change is now with the institution of the capacity fee, we're back to the principle of growth paying for growth, which then improves our utility fund, which ultimately helps our ratepayers in the long run. And so we also have heard council loud and clear that they want to continue that philosophy of growth paying for growth. So we will be doing a new impact fee study this year because the capacity fees only covered water and wastewater, but there are other costs to growth that should be borne by the growth itself and not by other ratepayers or taxpayers in the city. So we'll be doing that impact fee study. That takes longer, as we discussed, because of limitations in state law about a 2-year implementation timeframe after that. But we certainly adhere to council's direction on wanting to make sure that growth is being responsible and it's not being borne on the back of our other taxpayers.
Mr. Reddy?
I think on the slides on the inflationary pressures, you put out four-year increases there and talking about growth. I think we've had quite a bit on the commercial side over those 4 same years, that growth, especially in Mr. Summers' district, with some heavy users there and a lot of industrial, commercial. And so do you look at, I understand inflation and pressures are probably the most costs burden for us, but that the growth that we've had over these last 4 years that you put on in these slides, you looked at how much that pressure on just growth has had on us and kind of looked at into what that cost was.
So yes, Mayor, Councilmember Heredia, we do. And we've always looked at, what projects, especially before the capacity fee. As we mentioned, we had $400 million of projects so Signal Butte was in there, and wells were in there, and a bunch of other things were in our forecast of that. So it's a balancing act that we work with the utility departments of, what projects do we need to do for growth and what projects do we need to do just for repairs and maintenance? And it's that balancing act of which ones do we need to do and which ones do we want to do, and to be able to balance out that forecast. And what we would do is we'd work with them to see, what projects it would be, and then we'd work with the city treasurer on what's that debt service payment, what's the impact to the forecast, and then we adjust from there of what projects. With the adoption of the capital, with the capacity fee, that helped out significantly because now with that $400 million, we were able to take that out of the operating forecast and be able to fund that with the capacity fees. And now what we take a look at is, what repairs and maintenance projects can we bring back in there, and how does that work with the forecast and be able to stabilize those?
As far as population growth, right after the census, we were just above 500,000. I think now probably closer to 530, I'm assuming, in Mesa. How's that affect the forecast here as far as population growth?
Mayor and Councilmember Heredia, when we update the utility fund forecast, we look at the account growth and we make a projection for each utility. So each utility is going to have different service areas. So for water, wastewater, solid waste, those are entire city service area. And we look at the account growth, what type of accounts they are, and how that's going to impact our revenues.
Vice Mayor, your turn. You've been patiently quiet.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciated the commentary and the questions on when it comes to water. Thinking back to our discussion a little bit earlier on sales tax revenue and growth, the idea there is that by growing our sales tax base, we can help add to our financial stability. From a water perspective, tying that in, I think we need to start looking at water as a commodity in economic development, thinking about if we're going to bring in companies, that how many jobs does that company bring in? How much water how much water does it use? How much sales tax revenue can be brought in versus how much water can be used? So what I'm getting at is I think there's a balance here where we need to point our economic development strategy on bringing in the types of employers and retailers that are going to bolster employment and our sales tax revenue based on water. Because we've seen some businesses come in, they use a lot of water, don't create a lot of jobs or economic activity. So we need to start thinking in that direction. That's my statement. As a question, Councilmember Adams had some great comments looking at the books and the numbers for bond rating. The question I would have is there's a lot of discussion about the cuts Arizona will take in its Colorado River water. Do we anticipate or have we experienced those discussions and that potential negatively impacting our bond rating when it comes to water utilities?
Mayor, Vice Mayor Summers, this is Mike Kennington. Yeah, we actually had a meeting with Fitch, the folks from Fitch last week or 2 weeks ago, and that did come up as one of the risks. Obviously, they're looking at ways to make sure that their bondholders or investors get paid back, right? And so as they look at the revenue, as they look at the fund balance, they do look at also the risks to the water source. And so we did have a discussion about that as well. That's also part of our offering statement when we do issue the bonds as one of the risks for the bondholders as well.
So Mayor and Vice Mayor, so the sooner we could get some certainty, but we all know it may be a while. We may have a bumpy road. I mean, we all hope that an agreement's reached, but if not, it could be litigation and that could stretch out for years. And so we're entering into a time where there's definitely uncertainty on how the markets will react to this. And so that's something that we're all speculating on right now, but if and when an impasse or decision from the feds comes down that will have an impact, we'll have to adjust accordingly.
Thank you, Mr. Butler. I think that just reinforces my point of thinking of our water more strategically in our economic development strategy.
And I will say to that point, Vice Mayor, I know if Jay were here, she'd be the first to say we have passed up on some leads and some companies that from GPAC and ACA who have reached out for us and on site selection, but the juice wasn't worth the squeeze when it came to the amount of water they were requiring versus the number of jobs that they were producing, and we politely declined, and they went on to other communities to look for that opportunity. So we hear you loud and clear, and we'll continue to make sure that's a priority as well.
I think that goes back to also what we talked about at the strategic planning session. Jim brought it up and I talked about it a little bit, but that cost benefit analysis to what you bring into your city, the land that they use, and the value per acre based on what benefit they're bringing. So whether that's a cost in water or and how much benefit in sales tax to the amount of land that they're taking up. I mean, I think those are evaluations that are legitimate to have prior to rezoning or, having a new company come in. So.
Thank you, Mike. Vice Mayor, any other follow-up?
No, Mayor, thank you.
Mayor, I have one thing I want to say.
Sure.
Incoming public question. So going back to the amount of the reserve fund, I don't have it up right now, yeah. Okay, showing the increase, I think 20%, right, fiscal year 30-31. Is it, just in plain terms, am I correct in understanding that we're trying to basically keep a 20% or above reserve fund so that we can buy debt, we can issue more debt, we can get more bonds?
Mayor, Councilmember Taylor, that's not the specific why we do the 20%. The 20% shows that we are fiscally responsible and sustainable, and it's a goal for ours. As I said, our principal is 8 to 10%, but we like to have over 20% to show throughout the forecast because it does help with the credit rating agencies. They want to be able to say, so when we can issue debt or when we need to issue debt, the credit rating agencies rate us at very good or good, so we can get that lower interest rate. So when they see that we are sustainable and that we're growing out of our negative to the positive net sources and uses, and we see that we have a good reserve balance, that gives them comfort that we're able to, if anything happens, we're still able to pay our debt and so forth.
So, but ultimately it is so that you can get a good rating to take out debt.
It is one of those, yes.
Okay, because the public is going to ask, why do you have all this money and you don't offset the cost of utilities, right? Like that's going to be the number one thing that we're going to hear over and over again. And so I guess it's philosophical at this point. Do they want us to have a good rating so that we can get a lower interest rate on debt? Or would they rather we keep
That's
it lower?
not where you
and
have
offset?
reserves. Mike,
No,
can
but
you
that's the
explain?
question
I
that's
know.
gonna come
I
up,
think
so.
that we need an explanation of why you keep reserves.
Yeah, Mayor,
And give it like
Councilmember
real
Taylor.
basic.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
language.
So ultimately, or fundamentally, we keep reserves to pay for unexpected expenses in the future. And so you think about an organization like GFOA, a finance organization, they look at reserves and they measure it by number of months. So when we talk about a 20%, they look at it in 2 months is their goal, right? Which is about 16% fund balance. So fundamentally, a reserve is set up for unexpected expenses in the future.
Yeah, and that is the primary driver. Now, an ancillary benefit of that, of course, is that it improves your credit rating, but that's a reflection, though, of the trust then that the rating agencies and the financial institutions have on the city that it can weather those storms. So it all comes back to being able to cover unexpected expenses. And when we show that we've been fiscally responsible and we have that, just like we saw in the general governmental fund, we were responsible with our reserve fund. And then when we had unexpected occurrences like we happened, we were able to responsibly use that. It's the same philosophy on the utility fund as well.
Yeah, I'm talking about the amount above what our minimum standard is. And I'm a big advocate of going a little bit above your minimum standard, but I mean, we're basically doubling our minimum standard. So these are conversations that we're going to have to address in terms of like, wow, that's quite a bit above what your expectation is for the city.
But a strong reserve is considered 16%.
Well, that's from one organization.
8 to 10, it
It
says.
depends.
Well, that's our
that's
internal
ours.
policy, but you said this
Yeah,
organization
Mayor,
considers.
Councilmember, go forth. The GFOA says 2 months, but a lot of cities and towns have different numbers. Gilbert, for example, has 25% as their minimum.
Sure. I want us to be able to publicly address that because that's kind of the question that I've heard many times. Oh, you guys are so above the standard city. Why aren't you using that to better benefit your residents over the financial institutions for which you would like to take debt out at a lower interest rate?
I would
Yeah,
debate this
and-
over the standard city. And also, let's take 10% off these reserve balances. Then you'd be looking at 3%, 2%. That's a very dangerous level to support any interruptions, any things that happen, especially when you're talking about utilities. Right now, the cost of electricity, the cost of service, the cost of water, it's a very volatile market. It is not a stable market. And if you want to pay, when we do need to make improvements like central reuse pipeline, expanding the water, do we want to pay a higher rate? What's the cost of that?
Great question. Yeah.
And Mayor and Council, that's why what we look at the city, we look at it as the 5-year forecast. We look at it as a whole. So when we say, okay, we're at 20%, yes, we'd like to be at 20% at the end, but we also look at years 3, 4 also to see, okay, where are we at? Because if we do have an incident or an unexpected expense, or like we have a warm year or a dry year or whatever, we can fluctuate, we have those reserves to be able to make those reactions and plan for those things. And that's why, as for Councilmember Duff, when we drop to 12 and 13%, that's getting right there to our minimum of 10%. And so how do we grow back out of that? We don't want to keep going down to the 10%, because then if something happens, then we have to kind of switch gears and see what we need to do with the revenues or reduce expenses.
Yeah, I think it's a quantitative question, like how many times have we had to use those emergency funds, those reserves? This is helpful for the public to understand. Oh, if we can give you some examples in which we've needed to do that, they will have a better understanding of why we buffer it so much. And if it's a very small number of times, maybe that's a bigger discussion we have later. If it's more frequent than we realize, then great, we have empirical evidence that we can provide them.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Mayor, Mayor, we can, sorry, City Manager, Mayor, Councilmember Taylor, we can do that. It also depends on the incident. So for instance, a water main break up on McKellips was $15 million. So that's one incident, so I think it all depends on what kind of incident we have, but we can definitely kind of come with up some of those emergency ones. Or what we also have reserve balance for also is any economic development that comes that, hey, you know what, we need to upgrade our system or provide for these at a timely manner, to where we don't say, okay, well, you know what, in the forecast we can afford it in 26, 27, but we want that business to come in now. So it gives us that flexibility to be able to have those.
That's a good example.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah, and ultimately, it's to the benefit of the ratepayer at the end of the day, under any of these circumstances. We talk about those reserves and the ability to draw down those reserves during these high escalation costs that we've seen over the last few years. If we wanted to offset those cost increases, our rates would have been dramatically higher about what we needed to go out to our ratepayers for. So we were able to lessen the burden of those rate increases, because we were able to responsibly draw down some of those reserves and utilize some of those reserves for these high cost escalations. And then ultimately, too, when to the question that someone had asked you about the benefit of the financial institutions. No, at the end of the day, the benefit is to the ratepayer, because we have to. These are large, massive projects that we have to issue debt, and it's only fair to issue debt because these facilities last decades, and so the ratepayer today shouldn't bear the sole burden of that. It should be whoever the ratepayer is over the lifespan of that facility. But if we then have a higher fund balance that does ultimately get us a better rating, well, that means that is less expense that our ratepayer is going to have to bear. So they're the ultimate beneficiary of that.
So those who are listening right now, when you're saying that because we had those reserves and we were able to draw down on them, we did not have to increase the cost of our utilities as much, because otherwise we wouldn't have had those reserves and we would have had to drastically increase the costs.
Correct.
Correct in saying that's the balance, basically.
That is the balance. That is the balance that we try to strike. Absolutely.
And I think you made a great point, Scott, and Mike, you might want to say, because I don't know that people know our philosophy on debt and why we go out. You just said it, but I think it's important to say, and it is because of that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just
sharing
reiterate.
cost among decades of residents and not those that are living here now. So if you could just reiterate it.
Mayor, Councilmember Goforth, definitely, City Manager Butler said it exactly. We try to match the benefit, the use of the infrastructure that lasts for decades with those who are paying for it. So rather than having somebody save up cash for many years and try to pay for it, and then other people use it over the life of the infrastructure, we try to match that benefit with those who are paying for it as well.
So if it costs $50 million and you're only going to live here for 4 or 5 years, you're not bearing the brunt of the load for when the city dumped all that money on that project, and then you're out.
Right.
And the next person who comes in says, thank you for paying for that project for me.
Exactly. That is it. Yeah, thank you, Mayor and Councilmember Taylor, for framing it that way, because that's exactly it. We just feel that these large, massive projects that would benefit a home for 30 years, the homeowner, whoever that may be multiple homeowners over the course of that 30 years who benefits from that wastewater plant or that water treatment plant should share in that burden as well, because they're the beneficiary of that, and whoever just happens to be in that home at the time that we built that plant shouldn't bear the full brunt of something that's going to benefit generations of users in that particular area.
And that's the philosophy that Gilbert took. And that's why you saw a 25%, I think a 45% the next year. They have something like 70% of increases over 2 years because they chose to pay for it in a short amount of time. And so the disruption on their water rates is 75% over 2 years, or 70 whatever percent. That's, I think, is irresponsible. The other thing is we did draw on our budget that we adopted last year. We took almost 30 million, 28.4 whatever million dollars of our reserve so that we didn't have to take the utility rate increases. So we spend it down to keep our utility rates low. Our actual costs were much, much more, and we would have to pass it along because of the dramatic increases, but we're able to use that. And unfortunately, there are conservative estimates that we ended up having a little bit of money to pass forward, which helped us in our projection that we're looking at in this year. So I love that we're doing conservative forecasting, but we are spending down our reserves as we go. It's not like we're just accumulating.
Mr. Adams.
Thank you, Mayor. I think this is a great policy level discussion we're having here. And I think it's great for transparency, for people to better understand what these numbers mean and why we set these policies and standards. So I think this is great. I'm glad Mr. Butler mentioned the how this affects a project with a long life, 30, 40, 50-year project. I look at again, the underwriting aspects of this from the perspective of a credit professional. It's sort of like somebody with an 850 credit score, 850 FICO score is going to pay a lower mortgage rate than somebody with a 550. It's part of the equation on the consumer side, and it's certainly part of the equation on either a commercial underwriting, or a business credit extension side. It's the C in those 5 C's of credit. It's part of capacity. So I think there's a lot to be said for having a strong balance sheet, a rainy day fund, if you will, that when that water main blows and we write a $5 million check that we weren't expecting to write, we had a place to pull that from. So, nobody likes debt. Well, other than lenders. Lenders like debt. But a necessary thing from time to time. And I think that what we can do in terms of policy that allow us to achieve favorable rates when we are forced to borrow, and we borrow by issuing bonds, I think that's in our favor, and it has a trickle-down effect. But I'm really pleased that we're having policy-level discussions like this that put these issues out there for people to understand. Why do we do what we do? So I don't know if that contributed anything to the conversation, but just my thoughts on the matter.
Well, we found the sweet spot on council here, so I'm not going to weigh in, but continue on, and we'll finish our.
Yeah, this slide is just a comparison to show the improvement in that fund balance from adopted budget to what we currently have.
So coming up next is, see on the slide, the budget process calendar. So next week, we start our public budget meetings. So we have one next week on March 4th at the Northeast Public Safety Facility in the community room there. Then we have 2 the following week, one at the Post and one at Gateway Library. Then we will come back on April 2nd with the city manager's proposed budget for fiscal year 26-27. And then throughout the month of April, we will have the department budget presentations to City Council. And then on April 30th, we'll come back and present the tentative budget for consideration on May 18th. And then we have scheduled June 1st for the capital improvement program adoption, the final adoption of the budget, and then the public hearing for the property tax. And then lastly, in July, when council comes back from break, the secondary property tax will be up for adoption.
Is that it? Is so easy?
Yeah. Yes, Mayor, it's that easy.
All right, I'm just going to add a couple things. Question on the quality of life. Does that ever sunset, or is that in perpetuity?
That's in the perpetuity.
In
Quality of
perpetuity.
life is in perpetuity,
Okay.
yes.
Mayor, on that, actually, someone messaged me. They said they wanted to know the quality of life tax. I think you said most of it goes to public safety,
It's
just all of
100%.
it? 100%? Okay, thank you, thank you. Your question has been answered.
Is it 100% public safety?
So, Mayor-
It's split up, isn't it, a little bit?
So there is specific
The firefighters, the
items.
police, and
There's specific items of, I think there was a portion of streets, but there's very specific language within the sales tax.
That's why it's
verbiage.
restricted funds.
So that's why it's in a restricted fund. And at the time and currently now, a majority of it does go to the public safety for those police and firefighters because of the way just salaries have gone and the way the tax comes in. So, but it is, if there is excess, there are some specific areas that this quality of life could be used for.
okay. To Ms. Duff's comments about, I'll use the word subsidize our payments on water, $10.2 million. I think we subsidized water, so we didn't have to raise residential water rates up so high, to your point. We continue to pull down our reserves, replace our reserves. And that, to me, that just builds strong reserves, builds trust, and the voters of Mesa have overwhelmingly trust us in our decisions on our financial goals. The other thing is, these future bills that are out here, and I continue to bring that, potentially a moratorium for 4 years on any fee, rate, utility increase that could affect every municipality, city, agency in the state. And then there's even a bill about delivery of sales points for online sales. And so if you order something from one of our online retailers and it comes from another source, that point will be sales taxed, not the person receiving it in that zip code. And that concerns me, because that's going to take revenue away from us if these bills pass. Again, as future, some councils can raise a city sales tax at the dais and have the discussion, policy discussion, whether we want to raise our sales tax. And like Gilbert did, Phoenix did, and I think there's some other municipalities. However, our charter dictates we must go to the voters for any city sales tax increase. I want the voters to be aware of that. That might be something we might want to consider based on all the handcuffs being placed on us in the future bills. So I really like having a strong reserve balance for just our savings account. We draw it down, we replace it, and that means we are very cognizant of our financial positions and weather the storms that are out there for the future. So with that, Vice Mayor, do you have anything you want to summarize or add?
No, Mayor, thank you.
All right, Council, I'll move on to item 2, if that's okay. Thank you, Chris and Brian. Item 2 is acknowledge the receipt of board minutes. Is there a motion to that effect? Thank you, Ms. Duff. Mr. Adams, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Aye. Motion passes. Next is current events and conferences attended. Council members, would you like to share anything? Mr. Adams, we'll start to the left and go to the right.
Well, thank you, Mayor. I won't steal anybody's thunder, but you and I had the opportunity to attend the ribbon cutting of the Arizona Baseball Museum, which is just a wonderful, wonderful facility and exhibit. And I understand there are some local historical artifacts there that are very impressive. And who doesn't like baseball? But Susan Ritchie and her group and the Mesa leadership folks have all pitched in. Really a great community effort. So I was very honored to be a part of that ribbon cutting.
Thank you. Ms. Duff? Yeah. All right. Frankie? Ms. Taylor?
I did get to take a tour of Mesa's, well, Scott Boucher is here. It's about 5 square miles of our city's natural gas and electric utilities, our grid. And I thought that that was very educational. It is quite a bit complex because we're dealing, there's a lot of technical language. But one of the things that I realized when I was on this tour, and I think this is good to say publicly, is when Irma came up and she did our financial statements, we talked about how we had $6.1 billion in assets and our $4.8 billion in liabilities. And a big question often comes up of like, well, why can't you just, sell your liabilities and pay, or your assets, excuse me, to pay for some of your liabilities? And it kind of epiphany moment when we were at we were at the Robson substation, and we're talking about the cost of the substation, the millions of dollars that cost is. Charlie, the gentleman who was giving us the tour, he said, this is one of our bigger assets right here. And when he said that, I registered with, oh, that's right, you can't just sell a generator. Like, that's just not how it works. So it was a good reminder to me as a council member that we have a lot of amazing assets that are stationary things that we are using consistently. And I'm very grateful for Scott and being my tour guide and breaking down some of the more technical language about gas and electricity. So that was really fun. Thanks.
It was
Appreciate
electrifying, huh?
Oh, thanks for not making a gas joke.
You t- Well, did they take you down to New Magma?
No, not.
Okay, well, that's a little longer trip. Miss, go for it. All right. I'll just add that with staff, I attended the Queen Creek State of the Town in Queen Creek this past Tuesday. Mayor Wheatley and her team, it's very encouraging to see their growth out there. They're about 90,000 population for the town of Queen Creek and all the things that they're doing out there. Yesterday, I attended an AI literacy roundtable discussion at Sky Song. I was invited. There were a lot of educators there, a lot of smart people. Ian left, but he accompanied me there. He's our AI guru, so did that. With that, Mr. Butler, can you share future meetings?
Mayor and Council, thanks for the discussion this morning, and then we will be back here next Thursday for study session at 7:30 a.m., followed by an audit, finance, and enterprise committee meeting immediately following the study session next Thursday. And our next council meeting is the evening of Monday, March the 9th, and we'll start with study session at 5:15, and then the council meeting immediately following that. Thank you.
All right. I'll just put a plug in on March 7th. I know it's a little ways away. That's our Lehigh Days Rodeo. If anybody wants to come out with your kids to a rodeo, barbecue, pony rides, and petting zoo. So it's down at in District 1. Mr. Adams will be there. I think he'll be out. What will you be doing?
Well, I won't be roping and a riding. Okay, I'm not going for 8 seconds on anything, but I'll certainly be there. It's a great event.
Love it.
And
Well,
if
we'll
you're
let
not
you
in, okay, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, we'll let you participate in the chicken chase.
That would be
Good
good.
stuff.
And if you're not into rodeos or want to try to bridge two events, we have the baseball block party in downtown Mesa on the 7th as well, from 11 to 3.
Okay. Competition. All right. Council, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Ms. Goforth, all in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. All right, everybody have a good rest of the week.